The FBI says there were informants in the crowd on January 6th. I know you're shocked. This was the new bombshell report from the Inspector General that was released last week, and it shows that informants were in the crowd, and that is no longer a conspiracy theory. But there are more questions than answers. I don't think this report is by any means the end. It's only a validation of what many of us have been saying. So the first person I wanted to speak to was FBI agent and whistleblower Steve Friend, who became a whistleblower when he testified to Congress that the FBI had been mishandling January 6 defendants' cases. So he's here to explain. Thank you so much for coming back.
I appreciate the invite.
Okay, so first of all, informants versus employees, what the FBI calls them in this report. Well, we should go to who's reporting on this in a second, but they call them CHSs, or confidential human sources. Can you explain what that is? And if they're deputized to do anything, why is this concerning? Give it to us.
Well, the confidential human source, the CHS, that's the snitch. That's the informant. That's just the parlance that the FBI happens to use for them. This is a person who's not a W-2 employee of the FBI. In fact, they're admonished every year by their handler within the FBI that they do not, in fact, work for the FBI. They're doing work on behalf of the FBI. They're only paid when they're productive, though, which is sort of a perverse incentive, particularly as it pertains to national security, domestic terrorism, the way the FBI characterizes it, because they will self-deploy and infiltrate, as they'll label it, but they'll basically become friends with people and then inform back on them to the FBI in hopes of ginning up a case. So the number of people there that day, I think it was 26 from the Inspector General's report. To me, it seems actually kind of low, but there's also a lot of omissions with this, just for the fact that it is an OIG report about the FBI, and people seem to be overlooking the fact that there were other law enforcement agencies who were present there and had their own informants.
Okay, so let's get to that sort of conflict of interest, because it's the government investigating itself and acting like this is all on the up and up and just fine. But you mentioned, well, this is, they basically answer to the FBI, right?
The Inspector General works for the Department of Justice. They're answerable to the same umbrella agency as the FBI. So basically, it's the government investigating the government and determining that the government did nothing wrong. And then on top of that, the investigators here do not have subject matter experts at their elbows to help them. So the FBI is able to tiptoe through the raindrops on a lot of the questioning, even if it is legitimate questioning, particularly as it pertains to undercover employees, because they play games with the language on that.
Yes, they do. Okay, but they admit here that they say, we determined that 26 of these CHSs who were in D.C. on January 6th in connection with the events of January 6th. 4 of them entered the Capitol during the riot. 13 were in restricted areas. None of them were prosecuted. So what can we surmise by that? That they were allowed to go in, that they were told to go in? Doesn't this open up those questions, those very questions?
Well, there's something called otherwise unlawful activity. So essentially, you can permit the informant to engage in activities that are in violation of the law if it helps to support the case going forward. So I think that there's an element of that. There might also be the element of people after the fact became, in turn, became confidential human sources because they wanted to evade responsibility for their own actions that day. So the number itself might not represent the number of people who were deployed in expectation of there being any sort of event that day. But I think another element to this is the fact that the FBI did lie on that report when it said that they did not canvass for confidential human sources. There were emails sent out to FBI agents outside of Washington, D.C., in the national security space, requesting that they canvass their own informants, who they have a quota for. Every agent has to have 2, and see if they were available to go to the Stop the Steal rally. So that's a lie from the Inspector General report.
Okay. And they admit, so that's one thing that you were able to surmise that maybe the rest of us wouldn't have known. They admit that these members were Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. So what does that tell us? That they had sort of infiltrated these groups in advance?
Yes, that is going on constantly. It's not just January 6th. This is the FBI's playbook. They find groups that they have a problem with their political ideology, with their First Amendment protected activity. And even though the FBI has a caveat that they don't investigate you as an American for that activity, that there are guardrails, the Constitution, they completely ignored that. And they direct their informants, or at least encourage them, to go and infiltrate groups and see if they can get someone to commit to do something that they're not predisposed to do. Look, it is in excess of 90% of FBI counterterrorism investigations involve entrapment. People who are not predisposed to commit any sort of act of violence, and but for the involvement of the FBI through a confidential human source or an undercover employee, they would never have engaged in it. So it doesn't surprise me at all, particularly with January 6th, because the FBI was desperate to have a pre-existing organization that they could pin this on, which is why they went after the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, so they could say, oh, look, those are militia violent extremists.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, number 4 here gives this summary of the FBI's general roles and responsibility. It's basically saying, well, we weren't really in charge of securing January 6th anyway. We were just sort of playing this support role, or we were supposed to share any threat that we had beforehand. So they're almost letting themselves off. Like, really, we weren't a main part of it. It was supposed to be Capitol Police and other FBI or other government law enforcement agencies. What do you think of that?
Well, unfortunately, they have sort of a get out of jail free card because there was not an NSSE in place, a National Special Security event, which is all the time in Washington, D.C., for an inauguration or a State of the Union or a fireworks show on July 4th. For whatever reason, the powers that be decided just on that day, when they knew there was going to be a large crowd gathering to lawfully exercise their First Amendment rights, they didn't want the full security package. And I think that that's what the FBI is going to rely on here. But they cannot rely on the fact that they have been investigating, using the dragnet to go after so many people who are engaging in misdemeanors at worst. And as a FBI agent who went through the process of being trained, was told, we don't investigate misdemeanor activity.
Okay, so as a civilian, I know that the FBI is allowed to lie to me. But are they allowed to lie to Congress? Because here they admit readily that they had prepared documents for congressional testimony and subpoenas, and that those documents were lies. They just had falsehoods. What is the consequence that the FBI can just lie to Congress like that?
Unfortunately, when the Democrats are in control, there's no accountability. And it seems like the same thing when the Republicans are. We have the Weaponization Committee, which has done absolutely nothing. There's been no accountability. And they're just going to continue to flaunt in the face of these elected officials and lie to them. Or they're going to be very lawyerly in the way that they respond to particular questions. So it's a little bit off topic, but I do think it's important to zero in on the undercover employee. An undercover employee is a UCE. That is an official position in the FBI. So you go through training, you go through a selection process. It's very rigorous. If an agent needs an undercover employee for their case, they request it officially. So the question was posed by the Inspector General lawyers, did you have any undercover employees there? The intention of that question was not UCE. They were asking, did you have employees who were there wearing plain clothes? The way that a lay person would expect an undercover to look. But the FBI answered back very specifically, we did not have any undercover employees there, meaning we didn't have any of the official UCEs there. But that didn't mean or even respond to the fact that they could have had other employees there, and we know that there were.
Okay. So then one of the things that Representative Thomas Massie has said in response to this, and he said, look, I've been called a conspiracy theorist for saying this for years now. This is shocking. And it shows that President-elect Trump needs to pardon J6ers on day one, and he urges them to do so. This is something that you've said because the FBI has been so cagey, they should forfeit the cases in which they have violated civil rights. So what do you think of Thomas Massie asking for this? And what do you think about the ongoing cases that January 6th defendants are currently fighting still?
I avow his perspective entirely. And I am fully aware that people engaged in violations of the law on January 6th, some of them violent. The problem is when the government gets away from its prime directive. The case here, the prime directive for the government is to always follow the process. That is your victory. You gather the facts and you present them. If the facts support a conviction, the jury has that say. If they don't, the jury has that say. The win or loss doesn't matter. But instead, what the FBI did was put their thumb and entire arm on the scale to get a particular outcome. And they manipulated it, and they made the process the punishment for people. People who didn't do anything illegal. They sent SWAT teams to their houses. So as a result of that, the government forfeits everything here. And even the evildoers get to go walk free. The comparison I like to make is Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby drugged and sexually assaulted multiple women. And then he had a behind closed doors meeting with the prosecutor, during which the prosecutor said, tell me what happened and I won't use it against you. And Bill Cosby did. And then the prosecutor turned around and used it against him. And Bill Cosby walked free because the prosecutor went for the outcome and not the process. And the fact that those victims will not get justice is the fault of the government.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely right. And so what happens next? Do you think that it seems like they published this report as if when Christopher Wray had already resigned in order to say, well, we're done with this. This is what we say. You know, we made some mistakes, shouldn't have done it. This is it. And it seems to me that someone needs to get to the bottom of who prepared lies for Congress. How do we know that the FBI now will answer honestly when they're pushed by one of the branches of government? What happens next? What do we do with this? Because I found myself so mad reading it, and I don't know what to do with it.
Well, you're going to have an incoming FBI director, Kash Patel, who's really been in pursuit of the truth his entire career. Look, he was at the forefront of the Russiagate conspiracy and investigations that went on during the first Trump administration. So I think that you have that guy at the helm, and there's going to be an appetite for people to come forward. You set the incentive structure in a way for people to come forward. Unfortunately, we're in this lame duck session, and I'm worried that there's going to be a lot of shredding of documents going on, but they can't shred the people. And the people who are left behind now have a twice-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The first time they came around a couple years ago when numerous whistleblowers came forward, they punked out, and they didn't step up. They didn't uphold their oath of office. They get that rare second chance now. They need to hold the line. They need to come forward and say what actually went on here so we can hold the people accountable. Because if you swear an oath and you carry a gun and badge, and with it, the ability to take people's freedom or potentially their lives away, and you go awry, you need to be held accountable. So hopefully we'll have an appetite for that. I know we will from the public. The appetite is going to be from within.
Yeah. Well, you can and should read Stephen Friend's book, True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower, where this was the linchpin that got him to speak out about corruption inside the FBI. So it's an exciting time. We're all going to sort of hold on. Thank you so much for coming back on Redacted and explaining this to us.
I appreciate it. Anytime.